Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I am Melanie Schmidt with Timpano Consulting and delighted to host this opportunity for some learning and exchange, a virtual conversation where we will all have an opportunity to talk fundraising. So I, through my organization, help organizations unleash their potential, help them remember what their purpose is and where they are, where they want to go, how they're going to get there, and how they're going to talk about it. And today I am delighted to welcome two advisors into our conversation about fundraising. Marc Pitman with Concord Leadership Group is joining us, and Sue Kindred with SK Consulting is also joining us. And they will each do a bit more introduction as we start to move into the conversation. But before we do that, want to again encourage everyone to use the chat so that we can know what questions are on your mind, as that truly does drive our conversation and really help shape the direction. And we want to make sure that this is as meaningful as possible for all of you, having taken time out of your day to be with us. So thank you for joining us. Our flow today, we will talk a bit about what you should be doing with your donors right now. We'll also talk about some of the key components for effective messaging and storytelling. And if there's time, we will talk a bit about how to find your footing as an organization so that you can truly hone your message and connect with your donors in really meaningful ways at this time. So that's some of what we will walk through today. In order to get a sense for who all is here, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll so that we can better understand who our audience is. And so with that, you should see the opportunity to share with us the lens through which you are joining us today, whether that's as a nonprofit executive director, a nonprofit development or fundraising professional, a nonprofit staff not in the development space, a nonprofit board or committee member, a nonprofit consultant, or another interested party that does not fall into any of those categories. So go ahead and share that information with us. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and share those results so you all can see who is in the room with us here today as well. A lot of nonprofit staff eking out the development professionals coming in, but seeing all across the board. So thank you all for being with us here today. I'm going to switch out the share and give us an opportunity to really center into our conversation as well. And so in order to do that, we know there is a lot of things competing for our attention, even in this very moment. So I'd encourage you to try and find your way into this screen and into this conversation. And in order to do that, we'll share some thoughts from Louisa May Alcott, encouraging us to have regular hours for work and play, make each day both useful and pleasant, and prove that you understand the worth of time by employing it well. Then youth will be delightful, old age will bring few regrets, and life will become a beautiful success. And that is what we hope for all of us in our endeavors as we find our way beyond business as usual and into these new times. And for the conversation, we're going to ask Marc and Sue to each share their perspective on the current landscape, what's changed, what stayed the same, and for each of them, what they believe is really critical for nonprofit organizations to gain their footing and find their way forward. And so with that, we will dive right in. Marc, I'll turn it over to you first and have you share your thoughts, and then Sue will ask you to jump in.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cram, spelled backwards, C-A-C-R-A-M, and I never get called Mike anymore. I'm an executive coach, Franklin Covey trained coach, living in Greenville, South Carolina, and I help executives of nonprofits do what we're all doing now, which is leading in complexity. I also have a cheat sheet up here just so I could remember who I was. So I was going to do my own. Some of you may know me from Concord Leadership Group. Other people may know me more from Fundraising Coach and how the book Ask Without Fear. So those are my cheat sheets are now gone. If you love those, you can go to fundraisingcoach.com/press and see it again. But what I wanted to start with was a couple of tweets that came out over the last couple of weeks. And then talk about the 5 things I'm telling clients to do right now. First tweet came out at the end of last month, and I had seen a lot of executive directors and a lot of people saying, well, the board won't let us do fundraising right now. This isn't the right time for us to be out there. It's not respectful. And you could, for those of you that could read the tweet, it says, nonprofits, if your board is telling you now is not the right time to ask, thank them, and then ask anyway. It's not their decision. So just a reminder of board governance. Boards hire the CEO and fire the CEO or the executive director, but they do not dictate day-to-day operations. That's the executive's job. And so there should be no board member telling you how you are doing your fundraising. That's the executive director's job. So I want to empower I think it was the 27% of people here that are executive directors. And then also the other tweet I wanted to share, you can look at Stephen Shattuck. Stephen Shattuck's was, there are no non-essential organizations when it comes to COVID-19. We're all serving a purpose. But this one I thought was really great from Beth Ann Locke. Here's what you don't want to say on the other side of this coronavirus. Oh, hey, we thought we'd give you a break during the pandemic and not bother you, but now that we're ready to start back up fundraising, do you have a moment? What we want to do is show relevance all the way through this, this trying and challenging. And if I could have a nickel for every time I've said the word unprecedented since late February, I'd be able to make larger donations to charities right now for sure. So here are 5 things I'm sharing with my clients to do with their donors. The first is to check in on them. Literally just calling, and it's still, we are now at the time of this recording, depending on where you are, 1 month to 2 months in to this crisis, and for many of us, lockdown, sheltering at home in the United States. But it's still appropriate to go in and check on people, even the people you think are the strongest. Ian Adair had an interesting comment. He's a nonprofit leader and mental health expert, saying just check in with people. How are they doing? Even the strongest people are sometimes feeling incredibly lonely. There are people now that live alone that haven't had physical contact with another human being in weeks. And so one of the things that we can do is provide that service of checking in with people. The other we can do is ask them if we could drop anything off. This has caught some of my clients that were afraid to ask for money and felt a little queasy about asking, hey, how are you doing? Found tremendous success in relationship with their donors, especially the older donors that were living alone, when they were able to say, could I go get groceries for you and leave them on your doorstep? There's the ability to connect with humans as humans is something we've always had in fundraising. And if these calls are awkward for you, you may have been doing fundraising inappropriately up until now. So here's a time that you can try to be that human and help connect with people. As Kristen Bennett and Samantha Swaim said on a seminar a couple weeks ago, donors were there for us. Now it's our time to be there for them. And that's part of this overall relationship cycle. But I'm also encouraging my clients to ask for money. We have seen unprecedented generosity in the last few weeks. I was just last week, somebody sent out a coronavirus email appeal that he hadn't done it yet. He just decided to do Stephen's screen, put out a video with 8 points to do. Within 45 minutes, he had raised over $10,000. He thought maybe based on previous experience, he might at that rate raise $30,000. And I just got an email this morning. He's at $75,000 for his cause. And he thinks he'll break $100,000. Your mileage may vary, but there are people that are being very generous. And if you're not asking for money for one of my favorite phrases is, no matter how conservatively we budget, nobody plans on a pandemic. Comes out better in print because I don't stumble over the words. And then the other place to ask people for is, even if they say we can't do it now, the stock market's really wonky, or I'm not really sure where we're going to be, you can ask them, do you have a donor advised fund? And I would recommend practicing this so that it doesn't feel like you're being prying or inappropriate, but just as you're walking around your house, do you have a donor advised fund? Hey, have you heard of a donor advised fund? Are you aware of donor advised funds? Do you happen to have one? These are funds that people use to get a charitable tax donation, credit on their taxes, and it's sort of like a charitable checking account. It could be at a community foundation, it could be a Vanguard, it could be a Fidelity. That money is sitting there ready to be directed by the donor. They've already given it. It's already set aside for charitable purposes. So it could be a place that you might be able to find some as low-hanging fruit, as they say. And then if you're scared of asking and you still feel like it's an inappropriate time, I'm not a big fan of giving days like Giving Tuesday now, which is going to be on May 5th, but it's like the sugar cereal of your nutritious fundraising breakfast. If any of you are Gen Xers and grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons like I did, they always had the sugar cereal, part of this nutritious breakfast. And they'd put pan back and it would be fruit and vegetables and all these other really good things for you. And then the sugar cereal in the middle. And I think Giving Tuesday, if it works for you, great. If Giving Days work for you. But we have one coming up, and you could ask your major donors now, hey, there's a Giving Day coming up. Would you consider being part of this match? We're trying to go to a few special donors, a few special friends of our organization. We'd like to build up a fund of $5,000, $10,000, $50,000. Would you consider being part of that group? That might be your excuse, a way for you to get a specific dollar amount in the ask. The fourth thing is calling donors that have given, preferably in the last few weeks, but even in the last year or two, and saying thank you so much. And not just for supporting our cause, for supporting our Performing Arts Center, for supporting our school, whatever it is that you do, but saying thank you for, and then giving them something very specific that's happened. Thank you for your support. Because of you, we were able to meet with 6 classrooms via Zoom in the last week. Your support of this organization has made it so that kids, even in isolation, are still getting entertainment and art. That's something very concrete. And all of these, you may have noticed, are on the phone. You could totally do these in email. You could do these in writing. The problem that with the email, sounded like my grandmother, the Walmart and the Twitter, with email is that you might broadcast it. And a lot of us have different time now, and I would recommend going one-on-one and sending them out individually, both for deliverability issues. So if you're sending through Constant Contact or MailChimp, your ability to get into somebody's inbox may vary, but if you're sending it directly from your own personal account, it may be higher. But also because it's right to take the time with people as individuals for this. The fifth thing you can do if all else fails, and I'm having some clients do this too, they feel like they're fine, they got their PPP loan, they're not seeing it, they've had really conservative fiscal management before, so they're able to be in a different place of shifting to donor database cleanup, making sure the emails are correct and duplicates are taken out and giving histories are right. I think there's a reason to do that now, but I would definitely make sure you look at all 4 of the other things first, because history has shown us we've never had a global pandemic like this in most of our lifetimes. I think the 1918 flu is probably the most recent, but in the disasters and recessions that we've had, and I know I've fundraised through 3 different recessions so far and numerous disasters, that the organizations that get the communication right at this point fare far better when things start coming back and the economic recovery comes around. They're much better off than the organizations that try to take their foot off the brakes and try not to be in people's space. I was just on a webinar, and I'm wrapping up, so I'll be passing it over to Sue. But I was just on a webinar with Marc Phillips. He's at Marky Phillips on Twitter. And he was saying that if you pull back now and you don't talk to your donors, they will not know that you're needed, that you need them. And you will be out of their space when it comes to actual giving donations, when they come back to it, when they feel like they're ready to start giving again. You weren't relevant in the past, and so their allegiances and focus will have shifted to other organizations. So I really challenge you to be asking. Great.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Mark. Always good to have that challenge, particularly for the folks who were logging in today on that happy side, having the energy in order to move some things forward. Sue, we'd like to toss things over to you and see what's been your perspective and your experience in terms of what this landscape is and perhaps moving that message forward.
Great, sure. First, I'm Sue Kindred. I'm a business strategist for nonprofits based out of Richmond, Virginia. And my tagline motto is "Alone is hard, together is better." So it's about doing things together. I also focus a lot in my practice on storytelling. So as Melanie said earlier, if we have a moment to get into that, we will. I echo everything that Marc had to say, but I guess I would take a step back and say a couple of things. Picking up on one thing that he said, I would say it is imperative that you showcase your relevance right now. If you were relevant to your donors 3 months ago, you are relevant to them now. They didn't just suddenly become brain blind to the fact that you exist. Your mission didn't just suddenly disappear from their set of values. So I think it's important that you showcase your value to them. But I think there's also the opportunity here to pay attention to how you fundraise, right? There's organizations, I feel confident, of all shapes and sizes on this call today. And it could be that you have a staff, that you have a development staff, that you have people, but it could also be that you're generally a small organization, or that you've had to furlough staff and you no longer, your development director is sitting at home unable to work for you because under the rules of furloughment, you can't have them doing any work. So you may be carrying all the balls, kind of like that old Ed Sullivan show where you're juggling all the plates. And so I think that we have to recognize that, Marc used the term unprecedented. We've all used that term, but I think one of the things that we want to pay attention to is not only are we in stress, we are distressed. And there's a difference there. There's a mental health difference there. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think we need to acknowledge that your donors and the community that supports you are in that space as well. I work with a lot of nonprofits. I work with some that have a really great, deep donor base. And I work with some that are all community-based donor funded. They have some community foundation funding, some grant funding, and programmatic funding in that respect. And so I would encourage you, I know this is about fundraising, but I would encourage you, if you have not reached out to your funders yet, to your grant funders, I would reach out to them and ask them if they have any emergency funding that is allocated during this time that they can share with you. I've got several clients who have gotten some, for their size and based on the size of the grant that they have, some significant funding from their community partners. So that's a place to look as well. And I know this is about fundraising, but I just wanted to be sure I said that. And I think that, again, it's all about relationships. It's about knowing how you showcase your relevance. So where on the spectrum of things do you fall? Are you a research organization? So you can show. We clearly have a good understanding of how impactful research is in this day and age. If you are a museum, the arts are keeping us alive and sane right now. And if you are a frontline provider, like, finding housing or mental health or food distribution, then you have a clear story to tell around relevance. And I would encourage you to look at where you are on that spectrum. I have a client that is in child endangerment. And so they are in the foster care system and adoption. And so they are working on what this is going to look like 6 months from now, 8 months from now, 10 months from now. So they're not feeding people, but they are also right in the thick of it. So, and I think Melanie asked the question about kind of what are we seeing in terms of trends? And I think the trends are, I think the trends are not as relevant as how you show up in your specific community. And by that, I mean the people who support you, your stakeholders, the people who have a soft spot for you in their heart. You know, when I teach fundraising, I talk about the arc, and you go from being unknown to known, and then you have what I call the lurker group, right? They kind of lurk around the fringe edges of, you know, they know who you are, they know your name, they kind of know what you do. And then it's that from that lurker group to becoming a supporter that your best opportunity for increasing your donations occurs. Because once they become a supporter, then they move from being a supporter to being an advocate. That's the space that you're working in right now. So you want to make sure that you are reaching out to the people who already found you relevant, whether that's community-based support, or whether that is a deep pocket, big, major gift asked donor pool. And I'll give you an example about sharing the need. Marc referenced the need to share your needs right now. I have 2 clients that are food pantries. One called me yesterday and told me that they had just hit the 300,000 mark in donations since the 1st of March, and they have another 35,000 that's been promised. And this is all a result of getting the word out, of telling people that we're out here feeding people and they need us and we need you. The other food pantry has had nickel and dime donations come in because the executive director, I think, I don't know this to be true, but I think that he feels like he's not doing his job if he goes out and he asks people and says, we need your money right now. And so they've brought in about under $5,000. And so it's dramatic difference between asking and not asking. They're doing the very same thing in the community. The communities are similar. And so I think it's interesting to say, if you're out there asking and you're demonstrating your relevance and you're demonstrating the fact that you need people to support you, then the money's starting to come in. People are really looking for a place to give, and they want to give from the heart. They want to give a place that they want to give to some place that makes a difference. And there's no place better than some place they're already connected to.
Yeah, that connection is a really critical component. And I'm curious, I know in the chat, we've started getting some feedback from folks about how their fundraising is going. And I'm also going to go ahead and launch a poll for others to do an anonymous response in what is your view of the pandemic's impact on your fundraising? Has it rocked your world and you're exploring new ways forward? Has it sparked opportunities for you and you're rising like the phoenix? Is it going to be the end of you and you're just not quite sure how to move forward, or you're still kind of figuring it all out? Because I know that's been one of the things that is consistent when we think about change theory and change leadership, is that everyone moves through changes and transitions in different ways and in different time frames. And what I've certainly seen is that while we talk a lot about how the pandemic has had a devastating effect on organizations and individuals, it's also really created a lot of opportunities for other organizations. And so to make sure that we're continuing to find that balance on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll in 3, 2, 1 and share the results with all of you. And half of us are still figuring this out and what it's going to mean, which also seems very consistent with a different kind of trend that I've certainly been noticing, is that in how people are able to think differently and really start to open themselves to turning some of those corners, as we all were put into our homes, some very abruptly, others with a bit more pace, others who are still out there on the front lines working through it. These are just whole new things we've had to figure out, and our brains are jumbled. And so it's time for us to kind of start turning that corner. But it is also good to see that we are seeing a lot of opportunities coming out of this as well. And one of those opportunities, and curious, Sue and Marc, when you think about, we've been talking about certainly the ask and that solicitation, which is very important. But I'm also curious, one of the areas where I've seen some good progress is perhaps less in the solicitation space and more in that cultivation and stewardship aspects of fundraising. And I know with some of the organizations that I've seen locally around the Dane County area, it's been really wonderful to see them focusing in on who their key contacts need to be and who's really going to make or break their organization moving forward, and addressing that a little bit differently. What might either of you add to that concept of, we certainly have to have the ask, but there is the cultivation and stewardship component that's also quite critical right now?
Sorry, I was reading a chat. A chat question. Marc, take it.
Yes. I've never seen fundraising as just being the ask. The fundraising is the relationship with a donor and helping a donor, helping discover and uncover a donor's values and seeing where those values match up with your nonprofit. So fundraising is still adequate and appropriate fundraising activity. It's different if you're trying to scrounge to make payroll. Then maybe the cultivation and the stewardship has to take a chunk of your time, because you still have bills to pay, and you have overwhelming pressure on your head and the sleepless nights that often come with leadership. But if you have a little bit of breathing room, or you've gone through your entire portfolio with one ask, reaching out to new audiences, this could be a time to show relevance. You could probably have those dream prospects that you always wish you'd talk to. Or you could do a database search like I did when I was working at a boarding school years ago, and found out that a gentleman had given $10,000 a year for an entire decade. We didn't have that kind of donor at our school. And then he was not talked to for 20 years. So I took it upon myself to start rebuilding that connection and thanking him and showing him the impact that his giving had made. Not without any knowledge, I didn't know if he'd ever give again, but I just wanted to do the right thing and make sure that he knew that he had made a difference.
One of the things that I think is potentially relevant here, and Marc makes a good point about showcasing your relevancy, and I would say now you can showcase it in the paradigm of COVID, and link that to how you're relevant outside of COVID, so that those two things are kind of Legoed together. One of the things that I would say is that if you do have a strong donor relationship, reach out and ask for advice. I know that's the antithesis of you ask for money, you get advice, you ask for advice, you get money. But I would say, ask them what their thoughts are. They have an investment in you. They are investors. I always, when I talk about the donor relationship, I like to flip that script and talk about the fact that they are your investors, right? I know we're not this is not a for-profit world, but they have given you something that is meaningful to them, and that is money, right? They have engaged with your organization in a way that links up their value system. So one of the things I talk about is kind of the Venn diagram of where the museums, where the organizational impact is, what the donors' deepest desires are, and where do those overlap. And in that space is great opportunity to have a conversation around moving forward. I also saw somebody in the chat feature ask about virtual events, and there's great opportunities for doing some virtual events. I have a client who 5 years ago started an event, and it has just exploded. They did a virtual event because they said, here's the theory. Nobody wants to get dressed up and go to another gala. So we're going to do an online gala where you write a check from the comfort of your couch in your pajamas and send it in to us and pretend that you went to a gala. And it has just exploded in terms of bringing money in. It brings in a good third of their revenue right now, a good third of their fundraising revenue. And it is
so fun.
It is absolutely so low on the staff time spectrum. So there's that, because they have the board do all of the work, right? The board, and it's also storytelling based. So this is the organization I was mentioning earlier that is in child endangerment and child adoption. And so they tell stories. It is totally story based, and whatever story you connect with, that's where you can give the money. So it's again, storytelling is scientifically based to be the one way we can get our idea into the head of someone else. And it's easy and it's online. So I throw that out there kind of as an idea. There's a lot of creative ways that you can take your events online.
So one of the things that some folks at Swaim Strategies, and I'll share a link to a resource of links for fundraising and COVID-19 coronavirus time, but two of them are with Swaim Strategies. They recommended they're having tremendous success taking non-techie nonprofits online. And one of the things they recommended is YouTube versus Facebook Live. YouTube, especially if you have an older donor population, are able to stream YouTube through their smart TV in a way that Facebook Live isn't. So you might want to think about, that could be a question you're asking donors. Do you have better access to YouTube or Facebook Live as you're trying to make some of those decisions too? Melanie, were you going to pop in?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think one of the other components is just really that encouraging that creativity and thinking differently about the fact that if, the line throughout this pandemic has been, we're in this together, and finding all of these together opportunities, and yet that is overlaid with a lot of what's typically competition of people competing for the same donor, that small amount of funding. And so I think it's been also interesting to see success with organizations who are thinking differently about how they're partnering with other nonprofits or supporting them differently in a way that perhaps late last year they might not have been in conversations or exchanging information or resources, and now they're starting to see value both from the ability to take some nonprofits who may have more space or more time, coupled with those who don't, put them together and see what the opportunity is.
Absolutely. I see a lot of that, particularly in my Central Virginia community, with organizations looking for opportunities to expand their impact by coming together with a common goal and a common vision and putting their resources toward that together. And it's amazing what you can do. It's one of the reasons my tagline is "Together is Better." I also would love to share the components of an effective story if we have time. I think that people struggle to tell their story, particularly when what I refer to as COVID brain has knocked everything else out of the vortex of what you can do. And so if you don't mind, I just want to share a couple of ideas around, and I'm not as talented at getting this into, there we go. You guys see that? Again, what I said earlier was about showing your relevance. If you were relevant to your donor 3 months ago, you're relevant now. They have not lost their soft spot for you. I would encourage you to not assume that your donor knows everything that you know. Include context and relevant details in your story. You don't have to tell them, if you're a dog rescue, you don't have to tell them, what the dog had for breakfast, but you do have to tell them the breed. So, there's context and relevant details. One of the things that I struggle with, that I see people struggle with, is the next two, and that is the authenticity. Be authentic. It's how you build trust. When you connect your organization's values, your personal values, and your own particular why. Why do you exist? Why should somebody care? Once you connect all of that, it's how you build trust, and that's that foundation of trust that's going to connect you with the investors in your organization. The other one that I have is that if you are in a a business that is a little bit technical, if it has technical jargon or technical language in any way, we get caught up in that because we deal with it every single day. People are hungry, they are not food insecure. So just be sure that you are plain in your language.
Thank you. Yes. No
Right?
one walks around thinking, I am so food insecure. What am I going to do with my life? But they wonder how they're going to feed their kids. Thank you.
You're exactly right. And also don't forget to showcase the urgency and do it with a positive spin. Tell me what's going to happen, what will happen, not what won't, you know. So hope always sells better than distress, always. So, but showcase the urgency. Tell them we need your gift now. And it's important that you come in. One of the things that I have had a couple of my clients do with some great success is go to their board and ask their board to escalate their annual gift. So if you normally make your annual gift later in the year, could you escalate it to now? And that has had some really good resounding results. So that's, and your board is a donor pool. Don't forget that. I think we have a tendency to think of our board as, somebody called it the other day, that group of people that just sit there and talk. And they are a donor pool. So that's just some, and I do teach, 3-hour classes on this. So that's just kind of a snippet to help you craft a message. And I will tell you, one of the things that I say is that a compelling story is great. That doesn't get you across the finish line. It has to be effective. And an effective story is one that causes people to take action.
I think one of the things too that you pointed out and alluded to is the question about, what should I be doing with my board? How should my board be engaged? And one of the things that I've been hearing and have seen with some effect as well is this is the opportunity. Not only is your board a donor pool and those who are providing some of that financial support, but they also have the social support and those social connections that's critical in order to move things forward and continue to be relevant and to build that relevance. Mm-hmm. So this may not be the time for your executive director or your development director to perhaps make a solicitation for your organization, but it could very well be that a board member could be the one to be out there asking on behalf of the organization, or making sure that they're doing those letters to the editor that everyone always thought were a great idea. Now is the time when people have the time to craft some of those things and actually put them in with some good news spins in order to generate awareness of your organization, but also move the policy needle forward, as well as garnering those resources.
And another thing that I would say about your board is that this could be a great opportunity. If you have a board that was less than engaged before COVID hit, so like February, they were less than engaged. This is an opportunity because so many board members, from my experience, are not engaged because they don't feel like they have a job. They don't feel like they have something to do. They don't feel like they have something that can contribute. And this is a great opportunity to give them the opportunity to be a contributor, a facilitator, a doer, to come to the table and get something done.
And for all of you board members who are out there, there were some of you who identified through that lens as well. This is also the time to take the lead of your staff. And so whether that's through your development team or through your executive director, you may have thousands of wonderful ideas of how to move things forward, but you also have to be pacing that with the capacity of the organization. And I think, Marc, you alluded to that up front in terms of that area of responsibility for really doing the fundraising and how that happens falls within the purview of the executive director. And so for board members to be asking the executive director, how can we support you? And what do you need from us in order to move things forward or in order to just help get your feet on the ground?
Right. I didn't mean that to be disrespectful at all, because board members tend to be very well-meaning. That's why they're on the board, but they're not the experts in the different aspects of nonprofit management or fundraising. So the one thing also, for those of you that didn't identify as board members, I'd recommend you get on a board, because we need to learn to speak the dialect of board members and realize if all of our organizations are governed by boards, it's really important for us to understand how that works. So just a little plug for your volunteer service, especially now in a socially distanced world.
One of the things that I've seen work well with a couple of my clients is board members who literally take their iPhone and record a short video of appeal in their backyard, speaking to that authenticity, or standing in front of the empty shelves at the food pantry or whatever else, whether their backdrop makes sense, but to just say, I sit on the board of XYZ organization, and we are doing so much in your community right now, or we will do so much, or we have done so much, whatever that message might be. And I invite you to join me in giving to this organization. And then just putting it up on the Facebook page, putting it out on YouTube, getting that message out there has really worked well.
So Melanie, you had mentioned trends. One of the trends that we are seeing now, a few weeks into this, is that we've moved past we just want to give to any charity, any support, any nonprofit, and donors are telling us with the research that Blue Frog Fundraising is doing in the UK, that we're on a downward slope of the initial spike, where they're consolidating their resources, and there are still people that are philanthropically active. They still have money. They weren't working anyway, and they're spending less at restaurants and all. But they're looking to see, how can we help with this pandemic? So to what Sue was saying about making sure that your story somehow shows relevance with the crisis at large. So you don't want to make it sound like you're the one that's having all the issues. There are people dying, and that may be more important than the next pretty art picture or something, which is very important. We're all needing to have different types of inputs in our life right now. But so one person on that particular webinar was a school, and they said, what do we do? We're not in school. Our after school program's not happening now. Could we do a fundraising appeal about retooling, teaching faculty how to actually, teach online? And he loved that. Mark thought that was great, because that would show the relevance of the people that are supporting you and how you're pivoting and adapting to respond to this. I wouldn't make up any COVID response programs, though, that you'll be beholden to later. I think right now it's time to be authentic, like Sue was saying, too. Be honest and try to just show a pandemic light on what you're doing, or a recession light too. But help us pay our bills is not going to be an effective appeal.
It will not, and we've seen some, Mark and I've both seen some of that come out of the sector, and it falls really, really flat. But what you can do is in some way show your relevance in other ways. So I have a client that is a museum, and they've put together so it's the Poe Museum, Edgar Allan Poe, and they put together on YouTube the post-pandemic playlist that is a variety of readings. It's some music, it's some books, it's things that kind of, and they've made fun of it just a little bit about nobody loves a good epidemic like Poe did, and he certainly knew how to socially isolate, and it's just gone wild, particularly in that community. So find something that is relevant to your community. They're also doing some outreach for homeschoolers. People who have been homeschooling all along are rolling their eyes at the rest of the world who are trying to now figure out how to homeschool their kids who've never had to do that before. So if there's something in your bailiwick that you can pull together that shows your relevance in keeping the community engaged, that goes a long way to saying we're nimble, we pivoted, and here we are. But as Mark said, don't rely on, we are having to keep our lights on, so we need your money.
I think also when you talk about that authenticity and that need to really find that authentic relevance, as well as then not rushing to create something specifically COVID that all of a sudden you're beholden to, or someone's trying to figure out what that moves to, I think raises also that interesting prospect that a lot of the ways for organizations to find their way through are going back to basics, and just some of the really good practices that we should be doing as professionals and as people who are moving our organizations forward. It comes that opportunity to really pause, take a breath, and go back and reread the mission statement, reread the vision statement, look at those values, look at the principles that you should be following to build strong relationships with people. And then how are you doing in that? Is this your moment where you realize that your ideology needs to change because in fact, it isn't helping guide you in these times of uncertainty? Or is it that you're looking to partner with people and you're finding that the values that you have created aren't helping you figure out who would be a good partner? Because that's really the core, particularly within the nonprofit sector, of the up and the benefit that all nonprofits have. When you take time to corral those emotions and that really strong, clear language that guides everything about how you should move forward, it does make the rest of this easier to process and easier to figure out.
I know this is outside of the realm of fundraising, but for executive directors in particular on the call, I would encourage you to if there's a moment that you can step back and get a little reflective, as one ED said, move off the dance floor up to the balcony. Look at what's working and what's not right now in this time of distancing and stress and distress, and do exactly what Melanie said. Just figure out, maybe that's expendable. Maybe that program wasn't needed. Maybe that value isn't, we're clearly not living that value. Maybe we need to revisit that. And it could be a really good time of uncovering some systemic issues that may have been holding you back, or unlocking the ones that have been awesome for you and you've forgotten.
I always like to guide nonprofits into exploring their why and answering the question, what do we really believe? And that takes some introspection to do that.
And one of the questions that came up in the chat, and I think it speaks to honing that message and remembering that it really is about, in the marketing lingo, segmenting your audience. One of the questions that come up about, do you talk with donors about your success in obtaining a Paycheck Protection Program loan or other supportive resources? And what does that message sound like? How could you frame that? And I think that, my answer to that would be, with some of your donors, absolutely. Because it's the opportunity to frame that you are looking for a variety of resources, you have a good business model, you were supported by your local financial institution, you have a game plan. I think I wouldn't frame it in terms of, we got a PPP loan.
Yeah, that's not the lead to your fundraising ask.
We pursued a PPP loan because it provided us with resources that had a forgivable component. Here's our intention for using that. Here's what drove us to make that application. Here's how we're going to survive and be viable outside of the PPP 8-week window, and what that means. And so I think the key is also making sure you're clear on why you're doing what you're doing, how you're doing it, and to whom you're communicating. What do they, Sue, back to your Venn diagram, what do they care about? What's the connection, and how can you get the plain language to them? This is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And I think,
I got a question about similar, that feels similar. Maybe it's not. Is it appropriate to fundraise when we've already met our fiscal year goal? Because a lot of organizations they don't have their fiscal year till July, and they've been having year end in March. They had so much money. And I think it's similar of, it's appropriate to fundraise while people are giving because you're going to have a new fiscal year. And so even though your PPP takes care of part of your operations, it's not all of it. And it's like our nonprofit's a gem, and we just need to share a facet of the gem. We don't want to shove the whole gem down a donor's throat. So we don't want to give all that information up front. It's not that we're withholding or being disingenuous. It's just that we know that there's other funding issues that we're going to have going forward.
And one of the things that I've shared on the screen for everyone are just some questions for finding your footing as an organization. And that stems from my my bias and my practice of getting the house in order and knowing where you are going from a strategic perspective, and then really channeling everything around that. And I think right now it couldn't be more critical for people to stop and reflect on the landscape of their particular organization, because again, it's different based upon your longevity, your purpose, where you're moving, really figuring out your options and your scenarios moving forward. And once you're able to be clearer about who will be critical for making or breaking your success coming out of this and how you need to act, it allows you to start prioritizing and then saying yes and saying no to things in a way that can also be backed up and substantiated when you're talking to a variety of different donors that are out there. So having that strong business foundation to then know who you're talking to and how you're going to move it forward. One of the other comments, and there's been some activity in the chat about this as well, is just again that we have this time of physical distancing, times when events that may be in person are now thinking to go online. Just any key nuggets of advice or experience that Marc and then Sue that you would offer to those who are on the call today?
So,
again, go Sue.
So I was just going to say one thing around the marketing of your event, and that is, it used to be that we had to get something in front of a person 7 times before they would pay attention to it. That number is now 17. So with all of the influx of how we get our information, the fact that we have multiple electronic devices giving us feedback, our brains are scattered, and then you overlay COVID brain on top of that. People are distracted and easily distracted. And I would just say that in the marketing of your event, about the time that you think that you've just gone overboard and done too much is about the time they'll pay attention to it. So that's my 2 cents in terms of getting it out there. I think whatever you do, if you market it right and you market it to the people who are already have moved from that lurker category to your supporter category, they're going to pay attention, but they have to see it first.
So on what Sue was saying, I just am reading a DM from a colleague who has sent the same email 11 times since the beginning of March. The 11th time she sent it, she raised $20,000. There are slight tweaks. There are 2 direct mail appeals in between there. There are some updates, emails also, but it's basically the same email appeal that people are giving multiple times to. And we saw that with Mark Phillips also in the UK. He said that the update ask is what they're moving to. They've scrapped their annual plan for communications and they're working in 3-month sprints now. And they're doing an update ask of great things are happening. Thank you so much for your support. Would you become a monthly donor? Or great things are happening. This specific story of something happening. Would you consider helping because our services keep being in demand more now than ever. And so you could do that throughout your charity event as well, using different social media tools to be able to do your fundraising event, to be able to say, this is great, we've reached this plateau, would you help us with the next part? And that was a weak attempt to try to get back to your question, Melanie. Could you restate it?
I think it's more just when we think about these times of physical distancing, we aren't able to connect, and I call it physical distancing as opposed to social distancing.
Thank you.
Back to that clarity. And we can't get together in person. So how do we do the grassroots fundraising?
Right. I like to call it social disruption too, because it is so disruptive to everything that we know and love, and it requires a different mindset in terms of outreach. And so Marc, throw it back to you. I didn't mean to.
I'm not seeing it. There's no magic bullet. It's the same old stuff that we've been saying for the 25 years I've been doing this fundraising gig, reaching out to donors one-on-one, the phone. There are going to be some people that don't want to use the phone. So now's the time to take stock on do I get the person by phone? And to Sue's point, 6 or 7 attempts used to be what it took to get in touch with a major gift donor. It's much more than that now. But texting, text Facebook messaging, just check to see if there are what ways people respond, and then log that into your database so that when you need to get in touch with that person, you can. it's going to be a lot of work, and I'm not here to, you know, sugarcoat that, but it's going to be really rewarding. What we've seen from our clients is that the work is just emotionally and financially rewarding.
Absolutely.
And I think you said a key phrase in there as well of test and test. And we started out the call with, this is a time of experimentation. So to be able to use that disruption to our advantage as organizations and as nonprofits. Absolutely. So that it's okay to let people know you're trying something out.
Yeah, there's a lot more forgiveness and appetite for that. Very
absolutely. And to also build those relationships, and this is the time to embrace candor. I've also been finding that people are receptive even more. If you are wondering about why someone did something that you didn't agree with or didn't understand, ask them.
Yes.
Be respectful, be direct, but ask them what they were thinking. And in fact, what you might discover is they weren't thinking, because they were just responding and trying to keep up and to do something. And so use some of this to your advantage. And we are coming to the end of our time. And I know that many of you have to jump off. We'll do a quick reflection to encourage us as well. Some words from Brené Brown. I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. And those words seemed appropriate for our conversation today and thinking about fundraising amidst uncertainty and moving things forward, and would encourage you to continue to find ways to see your donors and your supporters, to hear them and listen, and then to show your value to them and to the community in ways that you have been doing. You now just might need to do it a little differently, a little more slowly or faster, or just in response to what your stakeholder group has to say. So I want to thank Marc and Sue for being with us and spending some time in this conversation, and for all of you who shared your time as well as the wealth of information in the chat in terms of ways that you've all been coping during these times. So thank you for being part of this. The recording will be sent out to all of you, and would encourage you to share that. And there are other resources available through the Timpano Group COVID-19 Online Resource Center. So you're certainly welcome to peruse that. We've had 5 calls now on the USBA funding and other options. So encourage you to keep up on those. And we'll continue to talk strategy, fundraising, and other things as we move through this together. So thank you again, and go forth. Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy some sunshine in your world today, or hopefully if not today, tomorrow.